He once believed that when he died, his only destination would be hell. As a member of a notorious gang, he had committed far too many sins to even dream of forgiveness. And then, just when it seemed that death had closed every door, his soul was pulled into a horrifying reality, where he witnessed religious leaders screaming in utter despair. Why were they there? What had brought those once revered spiritual guides to such terrifying punishment? If you have the courage, keep listening, because this story is not for the faint of heart or the easily frightened, but it will be one of the most vivid, terrifying, and authentic near-death experiences you've ever heard. And you're watching Eternal Bible Stories, where we share true near-death testimonies to awaken faith and bring light to the soul. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now and leave a comment with Amen and your city, so that God knows you're watching and ready to receive his blessings. Now, listen closely to his testimony. People used to call me Malik Cross. It was the name I chose for myself after joining the gang, a name that sounded tough, cold, and made people keep their distance. But behind that facade, I was just a kid who grew up among the crumbling buildings of Southside Chicago, where gunshots rang out more often than church bells, and dreams often died before they could even be spoken. No one in my neighborhood grew up with a roadmap to heaven. We only learned how to survive, and survival here meant being ruthless. I never met my father. All I knew about him was an old photo and my mother's warning, "Don't follow in your father's footsteps." But bitterly, that's exactly the path I took. My mother raised 5 kids on her own, working 2 exhausting jobs without ever once complaining. I loved her, but I also resented the life that had pushed her into a corner. I promised myself I'd give her a better life, but in the end, I chose the path that hurt her the most. I craved respect, craved an escape from the suffocating poverty that choked my childhood, and so the name Malik Cross began to be known, not for being smart, but because I was bolder, meaner, and less afraid of dying than the rest. I used to think that if I wasn't strong, I'd be devoured, but that strength turned me into a monster, at least in my mother's eyes. I remember one night she cried, thinking I was asleep. She whispered, "Oh, my son, I begged God, but why do you keep drifting further from the light?" Back then, I quietly laughed to myself, but now, whenever I remember it, it feels like someone is squeezing my heart. I didn't seek God, and to be honest, I hoped he wouldn't find me, because the sins I'd committed felt unforgivable. But maybe he was watching me all along, even when I was running from the light. And on that fateful day, when I lay in a pool of blood, 2 bullets tearing through my stomach, my soul beginning to slip out of my body, I finally understood all the toughness, all the reputation, and the name Malik Cross that I'd spent years building meant nothing in the face of the truth waiting for me after death. It was October 17th, 2013. At the time, I was in Chicago, and back then I was an active member of a gang. Something unfortunate, but in a strange way also a blessing, because it was what ultimately led me to God. The area we lived in was very crowded, so it was rare to notice if someone was following you, but that day I had a strong feeling someone was tailing me. When I entered a store, I saw a man. Something in my gut told me something wasn't right. He greeted me, I greeted him back, but the uneasy feeling didn't leave. I glanced over at my friend, about to say something, but then brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. About 30 minutes later, we went to another store to shop. That night we had plans to go clubbing, so we wanted to buy some new clothes and grab a bite to eat. Just a normal routine like many people do, shopping in preparation for a fun night out. As we stepped out of the second store, I saw him again. This time, he was sitting in a car just outside. That was strange, really strange. My district had over 500,000 people, so running into the same person twice within 30 minutes at different locations was highly unusual. I tried to shake off the feeling, but I still turned to my friend and said, "Hey, it's that guy again." My friend replied, "Man, you being paranoid, ain't nobody watching you like that," and laughed it off. But that gut feeling stayed with me, persistent and unshakable. Then we went to a clothing store. As I stepped out, he appeared again. At this point I thought, wait a minute, something's definitely not right. Even my friend started to notice and agreed, yeah, something's off for sure. We decided to head home. But a few hours later, when I stepped out of the building where I lived, he was standing right there in front of me. I told myself, all right, I got to ask who this guy is. Maybe I know him from somewhere, 'cause he's clearly been following me. So I walked up to him. As I got closer, he asked, "Got a lighter?" He had a cigar in his mouth. I said, "Yeah, sure." And as I reached into my pocket to hand him the lighter, everything suddenly changed. I saw a flash of blue light. That's the last clear memory I have. Then I smelled sulfur, like the scent of a freshly struck matchbook. That's the only way I can describe it. I looked down, and he looked back at me with a wicked grin on his face. That's when I realized he had a gun. Maybe I was in complete shock. The first shot hit me in the lower abdomen. Then he shot again. As I looked at him, everything slowed down, like time had frozen. He had this evil look in his eyes, like he was saying, "I got you now." It was the most sinister gaze I had ever seen. After the second shot, when I fell backward, I could feel the force of the bullet knocking me down. I began to lose consciousness, my vision dimmed. But as I fell backward and things started to fade, I immediately felt like I was falling forward. It's hard to explain. I was lying on my back, but it felt like I was plunging head first. And from there, everything began. The first thing I noticed as I fell was an absolute emptiness, a darkness so deep it felt alive, clinging to me with a terror no words on earth could ever describe. I've always said that if you were blindfolded, buried underground, and then blindfolded again, even that darkness couldn't compare to what I saw. It wasn't just physical darkness, it had a spiritual element, as if it was alive, thriving, and it terrified me to my core. As I fell, the speed was beyond the speed of light, as if I had entered a completely different dimension. During the fall, I felt everything good inside me being stripped away. Hope, love, laughter, joy, connection to others, all of it vanished. The deeper and faster I fell, the more I felt exposed. Not physically naked, but spiritually naked, a deep vulnerability that no earthly experience could compare to. It was as if my soul, my personality, the traits that made me who I was, were being peeled away, piece by piece, leaving me completely bare. As I kept falling, I smelled a horrific stench, a smell far worse than anything I had ever encountered in life. You could gather all the rotting corpses and decomposing animals on earth, and it still wouldn't come close to the horror of that stench. I realized I was in spirit form now, no longer in a physical body, and in this spiritual realm, my five senses, taste, smell, hearing, sight, and touch, had not faded. In fact, they were magnified many times over, sharper and more intense than anything I had ever known. As I fell deeper, I saw a tiny speck of light in the distance. It grew larger and larger until I realized it was a gate. Then I began to hear screams, sounds that didn't just enter my ears but pierced into my soul, vibrating through my entire being. The strangest part was that although there were millions, maybe even billions of screams at once, I could still hear each one individually, every scream distinct, as if each carried its own painful story. As the gate of light opened wider, I saw that it resembled a system of ancient caves, dark and mysterious. Then I felt the heat, a terrifying, indescribable temperature, saturating everything around me as I passed through the gate. I landed with a slash-like sound, as if I had been slammed to the bottom. When I hit the ground, it was still dark around me, but then I began to see pits of fire bursting to life everywhere. These flames were like small furnaces, burning fiercely, and the light from them was the only thing illuminating the space, allowing me to see more clearly. But what horrified me most was the sight before me. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of fire pits stretching endlessly, so far my eyes couldn't see the end. In those pits were people, some reduced to charred skeletons, some still with flesh, torn and suspended in glowing red lava. Surrounding them were demons, creatures that resembled reptiles, so revolting it defied imagination. Some were towering, easily 12 or 13 feet tall, around 3.6, 4.4 meters, while others were small, about 3 feet, around 1 meter. They stood around the pits, and whenever someone tried to crawl out of the lava, they would kick them down or throw them back in using rusted tools that looked like ancient relics. They laughed and mocked, delighting in the pain. Hell is not just one place. It has many different sections. There are central pits of fire, but on either side are caves, prison-like tombs, each holding a unique form of torture. I saw insects, maggots the size of soda cans, thick and disgusting, crawling everywhere. At first, I didn't notice them, but then I felt them biting my legs. The smaller ones burrowed into my skin, eating me from the inside out. The pain was unbearable, but I believe God reduced it for me, because there was no way I could have endured the full extent. A massive demon suddenly grabbed my head and flung me across the space with supernatural strength. They are so powerful, no human can resist them. When I lifted my head, what I saw shook my soul more than any physical wound ever could. Before me was another region, distinct, darker, and more terrifying than all the rest. No longer were there scattered pits of fire, but a blackened square ablaze with twisted, sacred flames. There I saw pastors, priests, clerics, and preachers, all once revered by men, now screaming in unspeakable agony. The tidy suits and ornate vestments they once wore while preaching now burned faintly on their bodies, never consumed, as if a silent indictment. I saw an old man, his face bearing the authority of a bishop, tied to a pillar of fire. But the flames consuming him were not ordinary. They came from burning Bibles. Each page and verse stuck to his body, scorching him like the very words he once twisted. He cried out, "I only wanted to help people believe in God." But a demonic voice thundered, "No, you wanted them to believe in you." Next to him was another man whose mouth was torn wide open in both directions, stretched until it ripped apart, with a sign hanging from each side engraved with the lies he once preached. God will forgive everything, no matter how you live. I felt a chill pierce my entire body, despite the hellfire still roaring around me. It was their lies, their sugary doctrines, that had now become the very instruments of their soul's torture. At the center of this region I witnessed a scene I will never forget. A long line of pastors and priests, still dressed in their ceremonial robes as they were in life, standing in line, awaiting torment. But the torment here was not brief. They were impaled through their bodies with rusted spears, like skewered meat, and paraded across hell amidst the jeers of gleeful demons. With every step, the spears pierced deeper. Black blood sprayed out, and other souls hurled stones and curses at them for leading them astray. The physical pain paled in comparison to the hatred and despair of those they had once betrayed. I also saw a massive pitch-black pit from which demons were being dispatched to earth. From below, toxic smoke billowed upward, carrying shapeless beings, spirits of depression, addiction, lust, and mind destruction. They rose to the surface like swarms of mosquitoes seeking blood, continuing their work of spiritual downfall among humans. Hell was not chaotic as people imagine. It was organized like a destructive army with clear roles and specific missions. And finally, I saw ancient prison cells, like tombs carved into the earth, locking away those who had spent their lives practicing witchcraft, worshipping false gods, and fighting against the Lord. Their torment was not merely physical. They were trapped in endless hallucinations, reliving their twisted memories over and over again, like self-written nightmares. A woman in one of the cells kept chanting the same spell, believing she was still alive. But each time she finished, her soul was torn apart by the very entities she had once summoned in ritual. I thought I had seen it all, but hell always has another level, another punishment, another type of agony no human mind can fully comprehend. Right before my eyes, a priest had his mouth ripped open by 2 fiery iron hooks, and then a demon poured buckets of molten lava down his throat. He screamed in unbearable torment, but what sent chills down my spine was how his scream seemed to pierce straight into my soul. Not a mere sound, but a cry echoing from the abyss of despair. Not far from there, I saw a woman, clearly a preacher, having her arm ripped off by a giant demon. Her scream was so intense it felt like her soul was being torn in half. But then something even more horrifying happened. Her arm immediately grew back, as if her body was never allowed to die, created only to endlessly endure, and then it was ripped off again. The cycle repeated endlessly, a punishment without end. The pain in this place was unlike anything on earth. It wasn't just physical pain. It was soul-deep agony, so intense it made you want to explode into dust. Yet you could not die, nor escape. I saw a group of religious leaders, likely preachers or temple priests, with their tongues nailed to stone tables using massive spikes. Their tongues were grotesquely long, stretched out by the very lies they had once preached. Demons passed by, hammering the nails again and again, each strike echoing like a dark bell of doom. In another area, a man dressed in solemn ceremonial robes, whose eyes once gleamed with arrogance, now reflected only sheer panic. He was bound to a chair and forced to drink buckets of boiling lava. The scalding liquid seared through his throat, burning everything inside him. His body melted into pieces, then regenerated itself. The demons poured another bucket, laughing with delight, as if torment was their favorite form of entertainment. But the most savage sight I witnessed was reserved for those who used the name of God to mask their lust. A woman, I knew she had once led a religious sect, was being assaulted by multiple demons at once, her body torn apart in ways so vile and perverse that I cannot describe them with words and still preserve the reader's dignity. Her screams were endless, fragmented like a soul being crushed into dust. I could not bear it any more. Everything I saw was beyond human comprehension. I would not wish even my worst enemy to step foot in this place. No one deserves to endure the horror unfolding here every second, every moment. And I could only cry out for God to save me, even though I once believed He would never hear the plea of someone like me. I thought of my mother. I remembered the nights she quietly knelt by the bed, praying for me, even though I always pretended to be asleep. I used to mock her faith, but now, in this suffocating darkness, where even the air reeked of blood and sulfur, those prayers echoed in my mind like the last thread connecting me to life. I could no longer hold on to my hardened shell. There was nothing left to cling to. Only one sentence escaped from the deepest part of my soul. Lord, if you still love me, please get me out of this place. I cried out in the midst of hell, not with my mouth, but with a soul trembling from fear and guilt. I wasn't even sure if I had spoken the words aloud, because in that place even thoughts were strangled by the darkness. I tried to call out the name of Jesus, but my mouth felt sealed shut. An invisible force weighed down on me, choking back every sound. I could scream in pain, curse in despair, but when I tried to utter that name, the only name that could save me, not a single word would come out. Only then did I understand. They are afraid of Him. The demons, those creatures tormenting me, knew very well the power in that name. The reason is because of us. We carry God within us. We were created, and the Bible clearly says we were made in His image. But that doesn't mean our physical appearance. It refers to the spiritual element within us. All of us have the light of God inside, whether we recognize it or abuse it. Each of us carries pieces of Him in our soul, without exception. And that's precisely what the demons cannot endure. Imagine it this way. They know they can't reach Him, can't hurt Him directly, right? It's like if someone hated me to their very core, but couldn't confront me because I was stronger, faster, or smarter than they were. But if I had children, and those children weren't as strong or fast as me, what then? To hurt me, to wound me emotionally, they would go after my children, attack them, to make me suffer indirectly. That's exactly how demons operate with us. They focus on hurting us, God's children, His creation, because they can't reach Him. I lay there exhausted, drowning in indescribable pain, but in that very moment, when I had no strength left to fight, I felt Him. I felt God take hold of me and pull me out of that place. In that fleeting moment, I experienced something more intense than anything I had ever known. Deep, overwhelming love, absolute freedom, and unmatched power. Just a trace of God's presence was more powerful than any feeling you could imagine, far beyond anything I had ever experienced. I felt myself rising, light and peaceful, but then, just as suddenly, I was thrust downward again, like being thrown back. When I came back, I was in a hospital bed. But I didn't feel like myself. Not entirely. It felt as though I had been forced back into my body, like putting on a costume that didn't fit. Let me try to explain it. Imagine layering yourself in 5 sets of heavy winter clothes, all soaked in freezing cold water. Every movement is stiff, every breath feels wrong, and your own skin feels foreign. That's exactly what it was like. I felt heavy, out of place, and utterly detached from the body that was supposedly mine. It didn't feel like I belonged here anymore. My soul had just been through hell, literally, and now it had been shoved back into this broken, earthly vessel. It took me over a week, maybe a week and a half, closer to 2, to even begin to adjust to being alive again. But even then it wasn't comfortable. Everything felt wrong. My senses were dulled, my emotions were disoriented, and my heart longed for something beyond this world. It was like I had been exiled from the place where I truly belonged, thrown back into a shell I no longer recognized. The moment I opened my eyes, I noticed a nurse standing nearby. She turned and looked at me, and then, to my shock, she screamed and bolted out of the room in pure panic. Seconds later, alarms started going off all around me, loud and urgent. The machines I was connected to began beeping erratically. I tried to sit up, disoriented and overwhelmed, and all I could say was, "Wait!" But there was no time. A flood of doctors and nurses rushed in, surrounding my bed, checking vitals, speaking rapid orders. Hands were all over me, touching, testing, confirming. I was alive, but I shouldn't have been. Later, I found out why the nurse had panicked. She had just finished checking my vitals and declared me clinically dead. I had no pulse, no breathing, and no signs of brain activity. According to the records, I had been dead for 3 minutes and 47 seconds, nearly 4 minutes with no life. She was on her way to call the time of death when I came back. Imagine that. 1 more minute and they would have zipped me into a body bag. There was no warning, no majestic voice from heaven, no bright tunnel or throne of judgment like some near-death stories describe. For me it was like a snap, a violent, sudden jolt. One moment I was in the depths of hell, and the next I was gasping for breath in a hospital room, alarms blaring, people screaming. No ceremony, no transition, just pain, shock, and the undeniable knowledge that I had just escaped the unimaginable. From that moment on, my life turned a new page. I was no longer driven by the flesh, the old desires, the old habits, from gang life, the anger, the lust. They no longer controlled me the way they used to. I began to live with a higher purpose, to share my story as a warning to others, to help them stay far from the path that led to the place I had seen. I'm not saying I became perfect. I'm still human, I still make mistakes. But now I have a compass within me, a guiding light that I didn't have before. I've realized a lot, and I want to share it with as many people as possible. First, live a selfless life. It may sound simple, but it's incredibly powerful. I used to live selfishly, only thinking of myself, but when I began helping others, everything changed. Find ways to support someone who's struggling with anxiety, depression, or any kind of hardship. When you help them through it, you're also healing yourself without even realizing it. I did that. I started reaching out to people in need, and that act alone pulled me out of my own darkness. That's the first practical step. Put others before yourself, even if it's something small like listening or offering a helping hand. Second, pray, but not just with empty words. Pray with real faith. Surrender everything to God and let go of what you can't control. I used to try and fix everything on my own, but when I learned to let go, when I told him, I can't do this, you take over, the burden inside me started to lift. Prayer doesn't have to be complicated, it just needs to be honest, trusting, and open to God's guidance. That's something you can do every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. Third, read the Bible and talk to God like a friend. Don't just skim through it, dive deep into it, look for meaning, and apply it to your life. I often open the Bible, read a passage, and ask myself, what is this saying to me today? Then I talk to God sincerely, like I'm talking to you right now. Not with fancy words, just straight from the heart. You don't need to be eloquent or memorize scriptures. Just open your heart and let him in. I do this regularly, and it helps me keep my faith strong and gradually changes the way I live. Finally, I want to emphasize this: don't delay. We often think, oh, I have time, I'll change later, but the truth is, you don't know what tomorrow holds. I learned that the hard way when I died and came back. Start now, even with just a small change. Every day you live is a chance to get closer to God, to live according to your true purpose. These are the most practical steps I can offer. Live selflessly, pray with faith, talk to God, and act today. If I can do it after everything I've been through, then anyone can. This is the powerful and heartfelt testimony shared by a man who once walked the dark path of gang violence and crime. He came back from the edge of death with a message that echoes deep into the soul. Do not take time for granted. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and more precious than we often realize. Every second you are still breathing is a miracle, a personal invitation from God Himself. It's not just another day, it's another chance. A chance to turn around, to love deeper, to seek truth, and to reconnect with the one who created you with purpose. You are not just a face in the crowd. You are not defined by your mistakes or your past. In the eyes of God, you are priceless, worth more than every diamond, every dollar, every worldly success combined. Your soul has eternal value, and nothing in this temporary world can compare to that. God sees you. He knows your pain, your struggles, your doubts, and still He calls you His beloved. So, don't give up, not today, not ever. You may feel broken, you may feel lost, but God specializes in restoring what the world says is beyond repair. He's not waiting for you to become perfect. He's waiting for you to just say yes, to open your heart, even if just a little. Take one honest step in His direction, and He will run to meet you with open arms. Choose hope, choose life, choose love, because no matter how far you've fallen, He's never stopped loving you, and He never will. If this story touched your heart like it did mine, I want to invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. What part moved you the most? Has someone ever carried you through darkness while hiding their own pain? By commenting, you're not just expressing yourself, you're becoming part of a community that believes in hope, restoration, and second chances. Your words might be the comfort someone else needs today. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to Eternal Bible Stories, where real near-death experiences awaken faith and illuminate the soul. Hit that like button if this message resonated with you, and share this story with someone who may need to hear it. May God bless you, and may His love surround your heart always.